Hello everyone and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy Fanatics head-to-head episode where we put two players up against each other to see who will be picking between the two for the 2025 season. This is episode 9 of the series. If you haven't checked out the other 8 episodes, make sure that you do. We've got 3 more episodes after this to go before the end of the season because the following week is when we have opening round. So we are creeping ever closer to the start of the fantasy and actual AFL season. I'm your host, Bales, and you can find me at BAILSDT across the socials. And joining me is another very special guest to be chatting about 2 St Kilda defenders who are at the top end of the price in defence, being Jack Sinclair and Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera. And I thought it'd be a perfect opportunity to get this man on. We're going back-to-back on HatChat. Here's the man that you'll know as the captain and the coach of DC Caterpillars. It is DC. Mate, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. And looking forward to chatting about a couple of Saints. I think they've kind of almost unofficially become my second favourite team in the AFL, after the Eagles, of course. But I seem to every season end up with a handful of them in my team, and I've had both of these guys a fair bit over the years. Yeah,
exactly. No, I was actually saying that to Jake last night off camera. I'm just like, DC, we've got him off with some St Kilda boys because I know he loves the Saints. So, as I said, we'll be chatting about Jack Sinclair and Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera. And DC will be taking Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera. I'll be taking Sinclair. And as always, we start off with our guests. So we'll chat about Nasiah first. So DC, why should we be looking at Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera potentially for our starting side in 2025?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of reasons. The first one, in some ways, might actually be because of Jack Sinclair. He's obviously dealing with a bit of a hamstring strain at the moment, which I'm sure is the elephant in the room on this conversation. But he's going to be touch and go for round 1. But the other factor is that Matthias Philippou has already gone down as well. And I have a sneaking suspicion that we're actually going to see more of Jack Sinclair in the midfield than we might have expected a couple of months ago before that injury. Mainly because the Saints midfield is pretty thin. If they've obviously recruited Jack McRae and Jack Steele is the skipper in there. But outside of that, I think it's kind of a raffle to decide who is the next midfielder. They've obviously got some up-and-coming guys like the Marcus Windhagers and the Hugo Garcias of the world, but I do think Jack Sinclair offers something quite different to all of those other guys. He's a little bit more explosive. He's got really nice foot skills, a little bit more of that outside class that I don't think any of the other guys have. So I'm expecting him to play a fair bit of midfield, and that, of course, means that Nas is on his own in the back line. Even when Sinclair was playing in the midfield for a lot of last year, we saw our man Riley Bonner, who it was an absolute travesty, was delisted at the end of the season because I think he actually was okay for a lot of the season.
I could hear the Jake vindication.
From I think it was a little harsh. He obviously had some poor games, but was pretty good in a lot of them as well. So I think, with no Bonner there, potentially Sinclair playing a bit more midfield, it really is Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera's backline to control. And I just think, given his age, what he's shown over his first three seasons in the competition, I think this is the year he probably gets over that triple figure mark. He was pretty close last year. And if you want a bit of a stat to back up that Sinclair Wanganeen-Milera comparison, he actually averaged 103.5 when Sinclair had over 40% CBAs last year. So he's up about 5 points when Sinclair's not there, taking those extra kick-ins and stealing some of those +6s in the back line. So if my prediction's correct, I'm guessing that's probably going to be around about where I'm expecting him to be this year. And given the lack of premium options with upside that we have in the back line, I think that's a pretty good deal for someone that's likely going to then be a top 6 defender.
Yeah, exactly. I think that he's such a good player, and I'm hoping that the Crows at some point go for Nasiah. Being in South Australia, I'm hoping that he comes back home because I love watching him play. He's just such a smooth mover. He does remind me of Wayne Milera in a way, but obviously the one that actually stays fit because Wayne Milera unfortunately struggles.
Gotta say, it's a bit of a dodgy comparison. Take your Crows glasses off there, Bales.
Yeah, exactly. When it's just the smooth moving halfback flank is just being able to watch them both go about it, particularly Nasiah, just because he just offers St Kilda so much. And I think you touched on a good point that with St Kilda's thin midfield, I do see Sinclair going into the midfield at times, and there could even be games where he plays a fair bit, meaning Nasiah's got almost a monopoly on the ball back in St Kilda's defence. I should have also said that at the start that in terms of ownership and pricing for both. So Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera is priced at the $1 million from his 97.7 average from 22 games last year. And he's 8.9% ownership. I dare say that has slightly risen since the Sinclair injury news. And then Sinclair is priced at 1.045 million, 101.9 average from his 22 games last year. And he's currently in 14.9%. So that was a little bit higher. I dare say a lot of people have just made that straight switch from Sinclair over to Nasiah as well. You did touch on that, though, at the end there. And you were saying about how a lot of these defenders, high priced, don't probably offer a huge amount of value. And it's been a big talking point. A lot of people have chatted about it in the preseason. When you look at the defenders like Harry Sheezel's price expensive, over $1.15 million. Whitfield, essentially the same price. He's got an early buy as well. Zorko, early buy, and also he is 36 now this year. Flanders, different role, early buy. He's expensive. Nick Martin, different role, early buy. Newman, unfortunately, out for the season. Luke Ryan was good for parts, but we don't know exactly what role, if he's going to have that chip mark role, so you can't start him. And then you get to Sinclair and Nasiah. And Nasiah's the guy that I feel like, particularly with Sinclair's injury, do you feel like he's got that upside, maybe 2, 3, 4 points compared to the other guys? Do you think that would be enough to be starting at D1 because of those top guys maybe not presenting enough value?
Yeah, I think so. I think with what you've outlined there, that we're pretty thin on options right at that top end that we would be confident are not going to drop in price. Not just that whether they have upside or not, but not going to drop substantially in price. She's obviously very highly owned, but there's a world where he averages closer to 100 than he does to 110. That's entirely possible with his role being thrown around. There's obviously a world where he averages 115 and he's clearly the best defender in the game as well. But there's some doubt there. Whereas I think with Nas, his floor last year really improved, particularly in the second half of the year. He barely went under about an 85 for the second half of the year. He was pretty safe. He gets this nice buffer from a lot of kick-ins. And, yeah, I can see pretty comfortably him improving by 5 or so points. I'll tell you the player he actually reminds me of is Lachie Whitfield. I think they move quite similarly. They look really effortless when they run. They cover a lot of ground. And we saw with Whitfield last year, he was just the man that everything went through in that GWS backline. And if Wanganeen-Milera has a season where that happens for him and he's not competing for that distributor role with a couple of other guys, then I can see him putting up one of those sort of seasons because he has all the tools and they want the ball in his hands because he's an elite kick and he's a very good decision maker generally as well.
Yeah, and I can't remember who put this stat out. I remember hearing it on a pod. Apologies for whoever actually said it. But, like, Whitfield, takeaways, kick-ins, he averages 92, right? So, like, with Nasiah, he's had some kick-ins as well, but I think that it will take a bump, especially if Sinclair is playing a bit more midfield. And then you've got, obviously, Bonner's not there anymore. Schoenmaker, is he going to how many kick-ins is he going to take? I think that'll be quite interesting. But I think Nasiah gets that one kick in a game extra. That's your 3 points upside. And then you also put on, I think, the natural progression. I know that we don't love the natural progression side of it. We much prefer injured games and jumping on those guys. But if you can put that with maybe an extra kick in or two, St Kilda, I think we struggle a bit more this year as well. I think there's going to be a fair bit of ball back there. So, like, is that sort of where you see that upside coming from? A sort of a mixture of a couple of different sort of components, not just sort of going natural progression. You think it might be a couple of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we're talking about this amount of upside, it's not as though we're talking 20 points here. As you're saying, like 5 points would be a pretty good outcome here because it means you're getting a top 6 defender at a slightly discounted price. But yeah, one kick in where he runs out of the square is 3 points. Then if he gets extra plus 6 a game, all of a sudden he's averaging 107 for the season. So that's, I don't think, out of the realms of possibility given some of the changes that have occurred there. Specifically on the kick-ins, he took 91 last year, which was the most for the Saints. I think it was maybe 5 of them where he didn't run out of the square. Sinclair was then the second highest with 65, so it's still a fair chunk. But then Riley Bonner also took 52. So let's say that maybe Sinclair's Sinclair's playing more in the midfield. Maybe his drops by 10 or 15 for the season, conservatively. And then you've got 52 from Bonner there that have to go somewhere. So I think there's a lot of extra potential there for his kick-ins to increase even more, maybe into those sort of Lockie Whitfield areas where he has a complete monopoly on it, because there's no one else in that team I would rather have the ball in the hands of if they're kicking the ball back in. He also can take ground quite quickly as well. So if he does decide to play on, he can get up closer to the wing by the time he kicks the ball. So I see a lot of potential upside there. There's obviously, there's no guarantees, but I think the way things are looking at the moment, there's a lot of things falling into place that should or could allow it to happen.
Exactly. And I'm even just looking at like the numbers here from Nasiah, and as you said about the floor, 3 games below 87, which are 84, 71, 63. Surprisingly, against the Bulldogs was the 63.
Yeah.
Normally, we know
a couple of them were early too.
Yeah, all 3 of these games actually were before were in the first 6 games, which and after that, his lowest score from round 7 onwards was 87 in round 23. So he's got that floor's lifted, but I also think, especially if Jack Sinclair's in there, I think ceiling games could also come into play as well. Like he only had the 2 scores, but over 120 last year. And funny enough, they also came in the first 6 rounds. So it was very up and down. But after that, it was just consistent, like from 87 to like 115, like just consistent across the board. Reminded me a bit of like a Michael Hibberd from back in the day. Just sort of, you just know what you're getting from him each week. So if he can add,
you're not covering Nasiah glory with these comparisons, Bales. Yeah. You've got Michael Hibberd and Wayne Miller up.
Yeah, but more meaning in the So hopefully people are taking the positive. Yeah, I probably could have thought of some better comparisons.
No,
hopefully people are getting my point. But yeah, so I think that Nasiah, and even just chatting about this, I'm actually getting quite bullish on potentially starting him this year as well. Moving over to the other side, Jack Sinclair. Hopefully I can get some better comparisons with Jack Sinclair. But so Jack Sinclair, as we know, hamstring injury at training a couple of weeks ago, and they ruled him out for 4 weeks. So they say that he is looking like he's a little bit touch and go for round 1, but they are hopeful that he can play round 1. So not quite the words of Ron Marshall, definitely playing round 1. It's very much touch and go. So I think we'll just start off with saying I don't think you can start with him. Am I probably right in saying that? Just these premiums, I've said as well last couple of years that I don't like starting these premiums that have had interrupted pre-seasons, particularly this close to the start of the season as well. Is that probably where you'd sit with a guy like Jack Sinclair?
Yeah, I think your last point there is the key one. This close to the season, like he's potentially going to be touch and go for round 1. I think if you're having an interrupted preseason in December and then you're getting a couple of decent months worth of work under your belt, that's probably less of an issue. But if they're going to be running fitness tests, a few days out from the first game, it's not really how you want to bring in a player priced at 102 into your team to start the year.
Exactly. So we'll look at Sinclair, I guess, from a lens of what he can do when he comes back and how we're going to be looking at it. So Sinclair last year, as I said, averaged the 101.9 and was, again, he does this every year where he'll have a couple of poorer games in the first half of the year, but he'll come home like an absolute steam train. So like just going based on his average post his round 15 bye. So he had I'm just getting up the games here. So there was 9 games, average 109.7 post the bye. And that's including a couple of 130s in there, a few 110 plus scores as well. So he does it every year. But then some of these poor scores first half of the year. So he had the 64, 59, couple of other 70s in there as well. But he's normally a pretty consistent player as well there. And he didn't play round 1 last year. So I think that was his first game in a couple of years he actually missed. Like he's been a very durable player for us. So that's, I guess, what the surprising thing is about him being injured is we don't actually see Sinclair be injured. But the thing I want to look at and get your take on DC as well is we talked about the midfield time and that might potentially see a bump. So last year there was 10 games where he had over 30% CBAs, average 102.1 from 86% time on ground. I don't think there's a huge difference, obviously, with his season average 101.9 to 100 over just over 102. So I think he's a guy that can score no matter wherever he goes. Is that sort of, if he played midfield, is that not going to scare you off from, I guess, looking at him as an early maybe season trade-in target or later on the season? Is that midfield role sort of, would you be happy with it? Because I think I probably would be. It doesn't seem like there's that much variance in his scoring.
No, not across the season average. I don't think there would be. What we did see though in that midfield role was maybe a bit more variation game to game. So I reckon he had a 60 odd there. He might have even copped a bit of attention that game from memory. And then he dropped to 150, or it might have been the other way around. He dropped to 150 and then a 60 or something.
Yeah, it was,
so
here you go.
He does
round 8.
have the he does have the
Round 8,
capability
9.
to drop huge scores in that role, because he's a guy that still likes to tackle, even though I think he's more of an outside player. But then pops up for those +6s all over the place, like he obviously does when he's playing in the back line. So I do like his potential ceiling. I think if I'm not starting him, I'm probably waiting a little while to see if his price comes down a touch, and maybe get a bit more of a clear read on actually which role he's playing. So I don't think he's necessarily a target if you don't start him that you want to be bringing in the first month or so. But I reckon as one of those early upgrades, as you were saying, if he starts a bit slow again, maybe his price drops to sort of in the low 90s or something, I reckon you can probably then jump on, and he could be a really good pick for you, as he has been the last few years for a lot of people that have brought him in sort of mid-season.
Exactly. And the thing that's helped that is those games at Marvel Stadium, where after the bye, they've for some reason, it's been like last 3-4 years, they've had like every game at Marvel bar like 2 games from like their final 10. It's quite crazy. But this year, looking at their fixture, it is quite mixed. So it's not quite as sort of condensed in how many games at Marvel. So like
within the first 5 of their first 8 at Marvel, which is reasonable.
Yeah, they go back-to-back in rounds 2 and 3. Then they got rounds 6 and 7 and 8. So obviously like 2 game back-to-back. Then they got 3 games. Then they go MCG, Optus, then Marvel, then TIO, then the bye. And then they go 1, 2, 3. So they got 4 of their first 5 after the bye at Marvel. So it's sort of like it is in little clumps sort of spread throughout the season. So, and we do know that both Nasiah and Jack Sinclair, probably a bit more for Jack Sinclair, scores a bit higher at Marvel. So I think that's a important thing to note as well, in terms of when you're looking.
Yeah, that was interesting actually. Just with Nasiah, his average I think was about 5 points lower last year at Marvel, which is interesting.
Oh, really?
But I do think that coincided with a couple of those floor scores. So maybe if you say that those are going to be a bit of an anomaly for him going forward, then maybe it's not that big a deal. But yeah, I was a bit surprised by that too. I thought he might have been better there.
Yeah, no, yeah, there you go. There's two low scores last year. Rounds 3 and 6 were both at Marvel. So very, very interesting with Nasiah there. But again, that could be that little bit of upside that we're looking for. So before we touch on who we're going to be picking, because I think we know who we're picking out of this head-to-head battle. It is Nasiah out of the two, just because of the injury, who you're going to be starting. Before we sort of chat about 2 of them after. With Sinclair's injury, is this making, I guess, you more confident in starting a Nasiah as a D1? Because I think a lot of people, like myself included at the moment, I've currently got Trent Rivers at my D1. I'm going quite cheap at the moment. But like Nasiah's been the one name now that I'm looking at going, if I'm going to go for one of these defenders, he's got a bit of upside. Do you think with Sinclair out that's enough upside to go, yep, D1, I'm happy to sort of lock him in there?
Yeah, I think so personally. If we can maybe get some clarity around what Sinclair's going to do when he comes back in, that would probably help. But I'm just a massive Nasiah guy as well. I started him last year. I had him for his sort of breakout second half of 2023 as well. So a huge fan of the way he plays footy, and he is awesome to watch as a fantasy player when he's on, because he can score as quickly as anyone. He can seemingly go missing or have a quiet start to a game, and then all of a sudden you check the halftime scores and he's on 70 or something because he's had a 50-point quarter. So he does score in bursts, and he can rack it up when the game is sort of on their terms. And that's probably the other thing, I guess, that is relevant for both of these guys as well, is what are we actually expecting from the Saints this year in terms of competitiveness? Because if the ball ends up living down in that defensive 50 a bit, then I'm expecting probably both of these guys, even if Sinclair is playing midfield, to get a fair bit of that ball as they're trying to transition it out of their defensive 50. So the potential for, I guess, more kick-ins, more slow play exiting the defensive 50, I think that feeds it to the hands of both of them.
Exactly. And the fact that Sinclair are already a high-scoring fantasy team, and I don't think that's necessarily going to change, particularly for those top-end guys, when obviously they're all fully fit. In terms of the head-to-head, as I said, we'll be picking Nasiah to start with. But the question I'll actually ask you a bit different to what I normally do. I normally say who we're picking. Who do you reckon will average more for the season? If you had to pick between the two, maybe minusing Sinclair, maybe the first game back from his season when he's there, and then Nasiah. Who do you reckon averages more?
Yeah, that's tough. I think probably Nasiah. I'll go with him. He's my boy, and I just think Sinclair's now 30 as well. He's had a couple of little niggles the last couple of seasons. Maybe there's a slightly increased chance he has sort of an in-game injury in there as well. I think it's the right time for Nasiah to really take over that back line and be the number one guy. No disputes whatsoever. So I think if that happens, I can see him clearing that 100 average, and maybe Sinclair just comes back a couple of points. That would be enough because they're only a couple of points apart on average last year anyway.
Yeah. I'm going Nasiah as one. I think I mentioned this with Jake last night when we were talking about Callum Mills. Is that I think it was 2023 when Mills averaged about in mid-80s. His role was changing every week. I feel like Sinclair this year, I think more so it might be flipping a lot more, and that maybe that continuity won't quite be there in terms of role. As you said, he might drop that average, and I think Nasiah, we know what his role is going to be. He's consistent now. That floor's up. I think if the ceiling scores go up as well, and there's a couple more of those, I think that average bumps over 100, and he'll be that 103, 104 guy, and maybe Sinclair's the 99, 100, 101 sort of guy. So, but no, I think it'd be very, very interesting because it could easily be the other way as well. But will be something interesting to watch. Have you currently got Nasiah as your D1?
I do, yeah. I just don't particularly like any of the other options, to be honest, at the moment. There's players in my team that I'm a lot more bullish on, but I do think he's pretty safe for a lot of those reasons we've spoken about, and I think there is potential for at least a couple of points upside, and very best case scenario, maybe he does push close to that 110. I think he's capable of doing that at some point in his career. Maybe it's this year.
Yeah. Do you see him, not, again, we're not going to lock any players in this sort of out, but do you see him as a guy that you're fairly confident you'll be starting with, obviously barring sort of any unforeseen circumstance or anything? Do you see that he's probably the guy that you'll get for D1, or do you think you could maybe see maybe a bit of a cheaper D1 or even a Sheasel?
Yeah, I'm probably not going to go the Sheasel option, I don't think, at the moment. But yeah, potentially a cheaper option. I guess the thing would just be, we've got to spend our cash somewhere. And a lot of the other lines, I'm going pretty cheap, looking for those real value picks. I do generally like the option of having a clear top player in each line as well. So he would be it for me at the moment.
Yeah, I currently don't have, obviously, either of these guys, and I don't currently have Nasiah, but he's the one guy that when I have play around with the D1, he's been the guy that's slid in there at D1 because, I just see that there is the upside. And I think that what did I say he averaged before? Like, 98 from last year? Yeah, 97.7. Yep. I think that's his floor. I can't see him going any less than that. I think that there's more upside. And I feel like this year, more than any, with these we talked about defenders before, the expensive ones, if you can get a guy that's priced in the mid to high 90s and you get that, I think that's probably still fine. I don't think that's too big deal, especially if these other guys drop back a bit more and you've saved a bit of cash to start Nasiah. So he's someone I'm definitely looking at. That'll be the end of the episode. Let us know in the comments if you guys are starting Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera in your fantasy teams. I felt this was almost a little bit more of like a 50 most relevant. Shout out to coach's panel there. We talked a lot about Nasiah, but I thought it was a good discussion to bring in with the Sinclair injury. But let us know if you're starting Nasiah, if you're fading him, and who you think will average more out of the two, out of Sinclair and Nasiah. Let us know if you who you think will be doing that as well. And any other things you want to put in the comments, feel free to do that as well. But DC, mate, thank you very much for jumping on with me for the episode. Where can people find you across the socials, and where can people find the HatChat pod, and also what you guys are going to be doing for the rest of the preseason and into the season proper?
Yeah, no worries, mate. Thanks for letting me come on. You can find me at DC Caterpillars, as you mentioned at the start. And then the HatChat podcast is up and running back weekly at the moment. You can find that at HatChat AFL on X. And we have a private group chat, private Facebook group on Facebook as well. So you can search that and request to join there. That's where you can find most of our stuff. The episodes are coming out weekly at the moment. Recorded one last night. And we'll be probably firing back up the spaces that we're, seem to be well known for now. on X, probably a week or so out from the season. I reckon we'll probably do one pre-round one at least. So jump on for those and come and have a chat with us live. Ask your questions, and we'll try to get to them. And you're a regular on those as well, Bells.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Jake was saying last night. I'm sure we'll be chatting to you a bit. So yeah, I always tune in on Wednesday night, and if I can always jump on, it's always great as well. Love chatting with you boys. And also for the people that don't know about I didn't actually mention it with Jake. I thought we'd probably plug it tonight. The HatChat seeded leagues obviously up and running again. But for anyone that hasn't jumped on for the Open League, do you want to let the people know the league name? And I don't know if you've got the code on you, but if you want to let the people know the code as well, then we hopefully get some extra people in there.
Yeah, sure. The HatChat Open League, which we've called the Open Mullet Overalls this year. It was the Jake ranks, but then Nathan was our worst coach last year, so it's named in his honor. Is our league to gain entry into our top 10 seeded leagues, where we have 160 of the best coaches going around competing for spots to move up and down the leagues. It's a 4 up, 4 down sort of relegation promotion system. And yeah, we'll have probably a couple of thousand people potentially in the Open League trying to fight for those spots. We had 25 new coaches come in this year that finished in the top 25 of that league. The code, if you do want to join and you're not in those leagues already, is ZYKSAS6D.
Yeah, cool. And I'll put that in the link for the description as well here for anyone that wants to jump on that. It's good fun. So make sure you guys get around that. I think I'm in League 6 this year, so 5 more years to go, and I'll see you in League 1. So that's the hope anyway. But no, it's all good fun, and hopefully you guys get around it. You can find me at BAILSDT, and you can find us at AFL Fantasy Fans on YouTube. And as I mentioned last night, our Patreon is up and running. So if you guys want to get involved in that, link is in the description below as well. Doing a cash league in that as well for anyone that's a Patreon member. So get around that. There'll be a Monday night live stream and all the benefits and that I've posted on the social. So you can just go about to on the website, patreon.com/AFL Fantasy Fanatics. So make sure you guys hit that up there. Make sure you guys smash like on the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next episode, we haven't quite locked in yet. We've got 3 episodes to go, as I said. So final week before the end of the series, but it's been good so far. We'll finish off with 3 more episodes next week. So enjoy the other Match Sims games on the weekend, guys. And we'll chat to you guys Sunday night for our podcast for our Match Sim recap. So thanks, everyone. Catch you on Sunday night. See ya.